All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I am calling the meeting to order. Aaron. That was a ding. Ding. Welcome to the Bloomington Rotary Club's weekly celebration of service for July 13th. I am your new president, Sally Gaskell. Thank you so much for being here. And I ask you all to please remain on mute throughout the meeting if you're not speaking to improve the sound quality for everyone. Natalie, can you please show the flag for a few moments of respectful silence? Thank you very much. I'd now like to, without further ado, introduce Cameron Davidson, who's coming to us from Amsterdam this morning. He's our district's current Rotary Global Grant Scholar and will give the reflection. Cameron.
Thank you very much. Yeah, like Sally said, I'm calling from Amsterdam. So if you hear some background noise, it's probably the train running by the apartment that I'm currently staying at. But like Sally said, I am the district Rotary Global Grant Scholar. I was chosen back in January. I'm a native of small town Salem, Indiana. So I'm very proud to represent my local Salem Rotary Club. So essentially this scholarship that I've received in January will help provide funding through the Rotary Foundation for my master's degree. I'll be moving to Salamanca, Spain, and I'll be there for 2 years studying global and international studies with a concentration in conflict management. So I'm very grateful. I'm someone who's been involved with Rotary since I was in high school. I came in first place in like the Rotary four-way speech contest. I attended RILA as a young high school student, and then I later did the year-long Rotary Youth Exchange Program and studied in Mexico. So Rotary has definitely shaped my life and has defined a lot of things for me and has really taught me the values of service above self and like upholding that motto. So I'm very grateful. I really just wanted to say thank you to all the Rotarians, especially, and those who have contributed to the Rotary Foundation. I just want you to see, what you're contributing to does have a meaningful impact, especially on my life personally, because, pursuing this master's degree in Spain is something I've always wanted to do, and it definitely wouldn't be possible without the support of you and the support of Rotary altogether. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, and I'm glad I got to meet everyone. There's a lot of people here, so it's nice to see all the faces, and I hope I become a familiar face for you guys. I'm very excited to represent our district when I go to Salamanca, and I'm really excited to come back and share what I learned from their Rotary clubs there. And yeah, I'm really honored to represent everyone. So thank you.
Cameron, thank you so much. We look forward to your adventures this year. And please feel free to tune in any Tuesday at noon Eastern time from wherever you are in the world.
Thank you very much.
We have many guests today in honor of our speaker. So please give a wave if you're a guest today. And do come back and join us sometime. We're here every week. Bloomington Rotary is an engaged group of people who make a difference in our community. And we have connections to like-minded people around the world. And we'd love for you to join us at a future meeting at any time. Thanks today to our producers, particularly today because we're streaming live on Facebook. We have Michael Shermas, Alain Barker, Aaron Davis, and Natalie Blaze. If you do get bumped off and can't get back in, we have a maximum of 100 people who can attend on our Zoom page. Then please just go to the Bloomington Rotary Club page on Facebook for the streaming. We have a couple of birthdays this week. Paul Hazel on Bastille Day, July 14th, and Fred Dunn, July 20th. Happy birthday. I have a few announcements for this week. First, we are invited by Vivian Bridges and family to attend the service for Judge Randy Bridges at Trinity Episcopal Church on Saturday, July 24th at 11:30 a.m., as well as his celebration of life across the street at Nick's at 12:30. That's Saturday, July 24th. And of course, Randy was a past president of our club and our our 2003-2004 district governor. Thanks to all who came out last Thursday for our first in-person event in 16 long months at Switchyard Park. It was so great to see all of you Rotarians in one beautiful space, sharing hugs and just being together as a kickoff to our year. We have a new board member. I'm happy to report that Amy Osajima will serve as our Sergeant at Arms for the year. This is a post that is selected by the president to be an at-large board member. And the board of directors meets this week. Board meetings are open to all Rotarians. Just let Natalie or me know if you'd like to attend. It's this Thursday at 12 on Zoom. The board is continuing to work on plans for returning to in-person meetings. We hope that on Tuesday, August the 10th, we'll be back together at the Frangipani Room at the IMU, along with a Zoom broadcast for those of you who can't join us in person. The program committee will be meeting 2 weeks from today on July 27th at 1:30. Michael Shermis and Connie Chikalis are our co-chairs this year. They could use 1 or 2 new members for the committee, people who might have interesting ideas about speakers. So if you're intrigued, please let Michael or Connie or myself know. And finally, I have a feature that I promise won't be a regular feature of my presidency, but today is an exception: baseball news of the week. So first, from Cooperstown, New York, Josh Raywitz, who's a graduate of IU and who recently spoke to our club, is leaving the Arizona Diamondbacks to become president of the Baseball Hall of Fame. Congrats to Josh. And then second, tonight is the annual Major League Baseball All-Star Game. I will be wearing my Salvador Perez jersey over my Shohei Ohtani jersey to celebrate. And I'm going to let our wonderful speaker talk more about the wonders of Shohei Ohtani. But I do want to mention that there's another two-way player who's played in an all-star game in the 20th century. And that was Martin Dihigo in the Negro Leagues All-Star Game in 1935. He was a Cuban player, played for the New York Cubans. Just shot at him. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Marcus Debro, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Madam President. As an assistant principal at Bloomington High School North, it is a great honor today to have with us an outstanding member of the North Hall of Fame. Mr. John Wertheim is a contributor to 60 Minutes, executive editor of Sports Illustrated, the author of 10 books, and a commentator for the Tennis Channel. All of us here at North and throughout the Bloomington community are extremely proud of him. Today, we will hear from John, who just returned from Wimbledon. John's recent reporting on 60 Minutes includes Shohei Ohtani. We'll talk about that here in a second. Sports gambling, the coming of driverless trucks, populism in Hungary, and many more stories, including an interview with Wim Wonders about the director's intimate portrayal of Pope Francis. Speaking of tonight's baseball all-star game, as I mentioned, John did a profile on Japanese baseball sensation Shohei Ohtani for 60 Minutes. That foretold the pitching, hitting superstar's entry into the Major League Baseball. Here is a brief excerpt leading up to the story on the baseball sensation.
Later this summer, thousands of athletes will converge on Tokyo to compete in the Summer Olympics. But the most compelling story in sports right now might involve a Japanese athlete currently competing here. We speak of Shohei Ohtani of the Los Angeles Angels, who uses his alloy of size, speed, and strength both in the batter's box and on the pitcher's mound. A 26-year-old pitching slugger, or slugging pitcher, Ohtani is not only the first major leaguer to moonlight since a guy named Babe Ruth, he's doing so to blazing effect. A solid MVP candidate this season, Ohtani has rightly become a fan favorite wherever he plays. He is fulfilling the promise he first showed as an intriguing, almost mystical prospect playing in the Japanese Baseball League. In 2017, when Ohtani was only 22, we wanted to see this phenom and phenomenon for ourselves. We traveled to Japan to meet Otani for what was his first interview with an American television network. But we first laid eyes on him in Arizona, where his team at the time had come for spring training.
Thank you so much. My fellow Rotarians, please welcome Bloomington High School North's own Hall of Famer, John Wertheim. Mr. Wertheim.
Thanks so much. I hope everyone can hear me. I wish we were doing this in person. Thanks. I told Marcus I've got a jacket just like that, but mine doesn't fit me as well as he fits his. So thanks for having me. Thanks to Jim. It's I wish I could say great to be here. I wish we were doing this in person, but Zoom will suffice as it has. I figured I'll speak a little bit, and I'll take you through the salad course, but I hope we can open this up and have more of a conversation. I always feel like dialogue is better than monologue, and rather than drone on, I'm happy to take any questions or talk about IU football or Mike Woodson or media or 60 Minutes or anything you like. So I'll speak a little bit, and then hopefully we can just kind of open this up for questions. But Jim had asked me to speak a bit about, he said, just talk about from Bloomington to 60 Minutes. And that was my homework. I feel like looking at this Zoom, it's you've done my homework for me, because I grew up in Bloomington. I graduated from North in 89. And I take a backseat to no one in my fondness for Bloomington. I just think, as you know better than anyone, it's just such a special place. And I also, at some level, it's the town, it's the community, it's nourishing, it's nurturing, but it was the people. And I have great parents who I know many of you know, and vice versa. But I also, it occurred to me that Bloomington was sort of the center of the universe in the 80s, and not just my universe, but the universe. And Billie Jean King has a saying: you have to see it to be it. Essentially, you need exposure to people that are successful and challenged and satisfied in order to really understand it. And it occurred to me I really had an embarrassment of that growing up in Bloomington in the 80s. I've always enjoyed writing and always liked nonfiction. And my father was able to say, hey, Jim Madison, our friend, the guy in the baby blue Volvo, he's the chair of the history department, and he writes these books you ought to read. And sure enough, you go to the bookstore and there would be Jim Madison's book. And I always liked media and newspapers, and my parents were able to say, your good friend Trevor Brown, his dad is the dean of the journalism school. And you had this school at IU, and it was named for Ernie Pyle, and it minted, I'm sure Trevor can help me, Jane Pauley and Dick Enberg and more Joe Buck. I'm sure I'm missing people, Bill Grimes. And my friend's dad was the dean of that school, and he was someone I could talk to about media. And when I was, I think, a sophomore at North, I love this movie Hoosiers. And what do you know, the guy that wrote the movie, Angelo Pizzo, the Pizzos, they live on the south side of town. And there was the guy I'd see at the mall who wrote the movie Hoosiers. And a song would come on the radio, and it would be, John Mellencamp sings this song, and he lives on the east side of, his motorcycle tracks are in front of the ice cream store on the east side of town. And more than anything, there was basketball and there was sports. And when I was in kindergarten or first grade, IU won in '76 with the undefeated team. And when I was in fourth grade at Rogers Elementary School, IU won again with Isaiah Thomas. And when I was a sophomore at North, the '87 team and Keith Smart, they did national championship every 5 or so years. And Bob Knight was the father of my classmate and friend Pat Knight. You'd see, here's a guy who's on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and you would see him there, be making that left turn into Heritage Woods where he lived. I wrote about, in my most recent book, I wrote about the summer of 1984 and how Bob Knight was the coach of the Olympic team, and all the players came to Bloomington, and you'd walk around town and there was, Michael Jordan would be at Peterson's getting a smoothie or at the Chocolate Mousse. And above all, there was a guy, Bob Hamill, and I think the HT was an afternoon paper. I'd get home from school and I'd read the paper, and there was a column about basketball or about football or about Pete Rose, and sometimes it was IU sports. This guy, Bob Hamill, that seems like an awfully cool line of work. And when I was a freshman in high school, I applied for a job. My friends were getting jobs. They were working the deep fryer at Long John Silver or taking tickets at the Von Lee. I wanted a different kind of job. There was a supplement. I don't know if you guys remember in the HT, The Whole Press, which was a high school supplement written for high school kids from North, South, and Edgewood. And I applied for this job, and I think it was $15 a week when minimum wage was $3. Didn't sound like a bad deal. And you would go and you'd write and edit, and the writing and the editing was always fun. You get to meet cool people, and you get to go to games and concerts and comedy shows. And I would go into the HT twice a week, and sometimes I would get to, if I was lucky, Bob Hamill would be there, and it was like a brush with celebrity. And sometimes you get a high out of him, and this very gracious man. You'd hear him on the phone, and he would be calling coaches from the Big Ten, and the next day in the paper there would be a story. And I thought, this seems like the greatest, the term had yet to come into vogue, but this seemed like the greatest life hack of all time. You could write and meet interesting people and express yourself and go to cool places, and they'd pay you for it. And so I did The Whole Press for my 4 years of high school at North, and then I went to college and did the newspaper there. And then this was the mid 90s. I already had a bit of a sense that newspapers might prove to be a bit of a challenging industry and risk averse. I went to law school, and I worked for a summer in a law firm, and it was fine, and the pay was quite generous. But I'd been spoiled, that I had grown up knowing that you could write books like Jim Madison, and you could work in journalism like Trevor, and you could write screenplays like Angelo, and you could be Bob Hamill. It was going to be really hard for me to take depositions and work in a big corporate firm under fluorescent lights when I knew there were these other options. So after my second year of law school, I took an internship. Instead of going to a law firm, I worked at Sports Illustrated. It was, I think it was 1996, and they were interested in someone that had a legal background. The sort of sports and the law intersection was becoming increasingly busy, and it was after O.J. Simpson and Mike Tyson, and I think it was a source of appeal that I had this legal background. Also, the editor at the time had done some graduate work at IU, and I think for my interview, we talked more about Ken Gross Lewis and about the Uptown Cafe than about the job, and sort of had this Bloomington connection. And I got the job at Sports Illustrated, a summer job, and I've essentially been there ever since. And a few years ago, I had a call. 60 Minutes was doing a sports show and wanted to know if I had interest in doing some sports TV. And I hadn't done a lot of television, but it seemed like something worth trying. And sort of one thing led to another. And I did some sports stories. Shohei Ohtani, nice to see he's made something of himself. That actually was the first piece I'd done for 60 Minutes. That we just re-aired, given how successful he's been this season. But I've now split my time between 60 Minutes and Sports Illustrated. And, the 60 Minutes is a lot of fun. And, most nights it's, most Sundays, it's the most watched show on TV, and television is a little different from writing. But in the end, I feel like I'm, essentially, it's 1988, and I'm doing The Whole Press, and Bob Hamill's in the corner all over again. You travel around, you tell stories, you meet interesting people, you try to say something original, and it's very much a legacy of the HT in the 80s growing up in Bloomington. So I'm really incredibly grateful to Bloomington. I really have so much fondness. I have so much gratitude for the people from Bloomington who helped me, but also just stood as examples that you could really do this thing. You could really write a movie, and it could appear at the multiplex, and you could really write a book about Indiana history, and you'd walk into TIS or Aristotle's, and there it would be on the front rack. so that's essentially my story. I wish I were here face to face, but I really carry Bloomington very, very close to my heart, and it's really lovely to be here. See so many. I'm saying it's. I feel like it's my high school yearbook coming to life. It's a very a strange feeling and a very warm feeling to see so many familiar faces. So I don't know how. That's my story. I'm happy to talk about anything. Happy to take questions and talk about my my high hopes for IU football or anything else. I'm not quite sure how this works procedurally or if there's a moderator, but if anyone has questions and wants to ask away, I'm happy to have a conversation. So thanks to everyone. Thanks to Bloomington, and feel free to pepper me with any questions you might have.
Thank you, John. So we've asked for questions to be posed in the chat since there are so many people, and Owen Johnson is standing by to facilitate that for us.
Thank you, Sally. Great introduction, John. It would be curious now to start with a couple of tennis questions. One is the tennis world taking Naomi Osaka's situation seriously? And if so, what steps are they likely to take?
That's a great question. I mean, this is, I assume, Naomi Osaka is this ascending player who a few weeks ago said she wasn't comfortable doing press conferences. And I mean, my take on her is that having known her a bit and covering her, she's spoken about some of her mental health challenges in the past. And when she made this announcement, it was big. It was international news. And I think this was sort of misconstrued as an athlete challenging this institution and showing defiance. And she's the most highly compensated female athlete. I think this was sort of wrongly framed as, oh, here's this millionaire who now can buy her way out of these obligations that she doesn't feel comfortable with. I think it was really misconstrued. I think this was really much more about someone's private struggle and someone's mental health challenges. And I don't think she intended it to be any sort of statement or any sort of challenge to the institution of the press conference or anything like that. It's interesting because she hasn't played since then. There's a Netflix film actually that's out today about her that hasn't been very well marketed because I think she's still not in a place where she wants to do publicity and media. She's half Japanese and is really in some ways the face of these Olympics that are going to start in a few weeks. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how she responds to this, because again, I think she made this announcement more out of her own mental health concerns. And I think everybody sort of ran with this as a story and as this act of defiance, which I really don't think it is. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see how she responds when she's back playing, how she deals with this additional pressure and this additional dynamic, but also she was a terrific player. She'd won 2 major events in the last 10 months. I'm interested to see and a bit concerned what price this will or won't exact on her tennis. So I don't know, long answer to a simple question. I think hopefully people will go back to seeing this as something that's very personal to her and that wasn't intended as a sweeping statement or a sweeping challenge. And then it's going to be interesting to me to see how sort of where she is when she decides to return and when she decides to return, because that hasn't been made clear either.
As a follow-up, do you think it might lead to a discussion of what athletes owe to the media? I think that's a great question, because I mean the rules of engagement and the sort of the cost and benefit, I mean, that's all changed. It used to be sort of you'd have these press conferences because athletes would want to publicize themselves, and if a guy from the Pacers is in the Indianapolis Star and there's coverage, people are going to go buy tickets and go to Market Square Arena. And the economics, sort of transactionally, these terms have really changed, and at some level
people are going to, Naomi Osaka has more followers on Instagram than the entire circulation of the New York Times. These young athletes, especially, essentially say, why do I need to be doing this? I can connect directly to my fans. I already have their engagement, their support. I do think that what people are realizing is that there is something to objective analysis as opposed to just having something filtered from the athlete. There have been publications that have been sort of for athletes by athletes, and they haven't done particularly well. And my theory is that everybody likes to sort of pick on the media, but I think we recognize there's a value in having news and even sports through this prism of objectivity, through somebody weighing in, through somebody not just getting fed what the athletes want you to see and hear, but there's value to objective analysis. So, I mean, I think it's interesting that it's gotten, and I think it's probably helpful, and it's probably productive that this has gotten everybody thinking about this dynamic and the role of the media and the role of social media. I mean, I think it's been a healthy discussion. I think sort of self-examination is seldom a bad thing, but I do think that people are a little quick sometimes to dismiss the value of having certainly politics, but even news and sports cast through this prism of media, and not just, we don't want to get our political news directly from the politician. And I think to some extent the same is true. We may love following athletes on social media. We love hearing seeing their tweets and seeing their Instagram photos. But I think what we're also seeing is that there's real value to this sort of neutral, objective analysis. That's a really good question to start. I like that. Thank you, whoever submitted that.
What do you think of Novak Djokovic's idea of having tennis players establish a union?
I am fully supportive. It's a little tricky because tennis is, it's an individual sport. These athletes are essentially independent contractors, and they don't have the protections of a union the way NFL players do or NBA basketball players do. What it also means is that Naomi Osaka can say, look, I don't feel like playing this week. I need some time off. And there's no team that's going to find her, and there's no owner that's going to pressure her to play. I mean, there's some benefits to being an independent contractor. I do feel like the athletes suffer financially for that. And, in team sports, in baseball, basketball, football, it's roughly a 50-50 split of revenue. And with gambling revenues and with these media rights, I mean, that's, the median NBA salary is approaching $10 million. In tennis, there's no union. You don't have that collective bargaining. And the players get 12, 15, sometimes 18% of the revenue. So I think that I think Novak Djokovic, who's the number one player in the world, and he's a historically great player, and he's trying to break records. To me, it's pretty remarkable that he's also taken it upon himself while he's trying to write history, that he also has become this sort of Kurt Flood figure for tennis. But I do think that tennis players really, at least economically, they really suffer for not being better organized. So I'm fully supportive of his attempts to unionize, and it's legally, I think it's a little bit tricky in terms of can independent contractors unionize, but if orchestra members can, and I think there are ways around it. So I think it's probably a long time coming.
One final question related to tennis. Novak Djokovic won Wimbledon. Roger Federer seems to be on the way out. Rafael Nadal is injured. These have been the faces of men's tennis for quite a while. What's going to happen when they're gone? That's a
great question and a great concern for tennis. I would like to see more attention paid on the women's side. You've had these four generationally great players. So the three you mentioned, and Serena Williams. There's a fairly long escalator down to the next level. It's not unlike, when I covered the NBA, and when Michael Jordan left basketball, it was very much the same. Who's going to be the next Jordan? What's going to happen to the NBA? Is anybody going to care? I would argue that, first of all, you like to have this problem. Better to have Michael Jordan than have parity, even if it means when he leaves basketball, there's a bit of a vacuum.
I think tennis is probably much better for having these titans than if they didn't exist at all. I think there will be a bit of a drop off and a bit of an inevitable, you know, we used to have Federer and Nadal playing in finals, and now we have two guys I've barely heard of who aren't relatively accomplished. I think eventually, the same way the NBA has, you know, Kobe Bryant and LeBron, and basketball's done just fine post Jordan. I suspect tennis will as well. I think there'll be some growing pains, but I think, again, the one thing tennis has going for it that very few other sports do is you have this whole women's side as well. So there may be this vacuum in men's tennis, but we can watch Coco Gauff and Ash Barty and some of these talented women. So there's a bit of a hedge with having two genders. But I love these tennis questions to start off. You threw me for a loop, but these are great questions that are really relevant to tennis right now.
And I think the New York Times had a brief story this morning that the two finalists in the men's juniors at Wimbledon were both American.
Yeah, it's the old. I mean, I would say the one kid who won actually is supposed to go play college tennis. Unlike, you know, we knew LeBron James was terrific, and he could be a draft pick right out of high school. Tennis is a little iffy with sometimes the best junior players can't make the transition to pros. So it's a little bit of fool's gold sometimes when somebody does well as a junior. But it is true that it's nice. It's a nice bit of it's a good story. And, you know, American tennis on the men's side has been down, so it is encouraging that, yeah, both the players in the finals of Wimbledon juniors were both Americans.
Let's move to college sports with the name, image, and likeness. How are the athletes going to react to that? Are there pitfalls or difficulties that you see?
I mean, to me, it's a little bit of a red herring. I mean, I think the top athletes, right? So if you're Zion Williamson, if you're even, you know, if you start for IU basketball, there probably is some revenue. I mean, it doesn't get to this fundamental issue of college athletes being paid for their performance and for the economics to change so the labor isn't free. I think that what athletes are going to realize is that for the very, very top athletes, it's great. And it's probably the right and just thing that the Heisman Trophy candidate's jersey is sold and he gets a share of that revenue. I'm not sure how far it extends beyond that. I don't know if the economics are there. I mean, I've seen other athletes. The golf. I'm a varsity golfer at the University of Oklahoma. I'm not sure you can try and do a podcast and you can try to be a social media influencer. I'm not sure if the market is necessarily there. I also think it does kind of divert the discussion. We had this Supreme Court case a few weeks ago where basically it was a 9-0 decision, and the justices were essentially saying, you know, Justice Kavanaugh essentially said, guys, keep going. The door's open. Keep pushing here for compensation. And I do think the name, image, likeness, it's a bit of a head fake in that a couple athletes will make money. We'll finally have athletes getting paid for their own IP, their own images. If you have a video game with an athlete, he'll make a little money. I think it's a very, very narrow sliver of athletes that are going to benefit from that. And I do think that the next phase in all this is just paying the athletes a salary, and all these billions being generated through media rights and the Big Ten network. How much of that belongs in athletes' pockets? And I think that name, image, likeness is it's a bit of misdirection where it's a little jarring. I mean, it's going to be strange to see college athletes, making a few of them anyway, making hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I also think it kind of postpones the more central issue, which is compensation.
Although Lily King, the IU swimmer, did say recently that if name, image, likeness had been in effect when she won 2 golds at the Rio Olympics, she could have made hundreds of thousands of dollars while still a student.
Yeah, I mean, I think some athletes even now, and we'll see. I mean, there are going to be college athletes coming out of Tokyo who are going to have significant profiles. some athletes are going to benefit from this. I mean, certainly the top football and basketball players, the Lily King types who have individual excellence, a couple of, I think it was Fresno State. I mean, apparently there are these volleyball players, I think at Fresno State, who have a million Instagram followers. They'll be able to capitalize. But I think for most athletes, this is going to exist in theory only. And again, to me, it just kind of, it detours around this discussion, which ultimately I think is really much more sort of the existential threat to college sports of how much of this pie is going to end up in athletes' pockets, and are they going to get paid for filling the stands and filling these media rights deals, not carving their own separate contract with a shirt manufacturer or a local car dealer or social media influencing.
Would it make a difference where universities are located? Say, for example, at University of Miami in Florida is a big area, or New York or Detroit, and compare this to Bloomington. Is it going to make things uneven?
I think it cuts both ways. I mean, if you are a football star in Norman, Oklahoma, or Bloomington, or Manhattan, Kansas, there's probably a market there. I think for other athletes, yeah, they're not going to want to mess around with a college town. Put me in New York, Los Angeles, Miami, Chicago. I think the other thing that's sort of a bit of a concern is just going to be some of these decisions are going to be school by school and conference by conference, and not with name, image, and likeness, but with the educational benefits that the Supreme Court ruled on in June. If, pick a conference, if the Big Ten says every student gets 11 laptops, does the SEC say, oh yeah, every student in our conference is going to get 15 laptops? I mean, I think the arms race that we're seeing with facilities, I think is just going to move over to some of these other benefits. What's to prevent a school from saying, come to us, we've already got the car dealer lined up who's going to pay you $50,000 a semester. I mean, I think sort of, the free market is a free market, and commerce is commerce. And I think that some markets are going to be more appealing than others, but I think also if you are in one of these markets, you'll find a way to make it work. And the market in Bloomington might be different from the market in Miami, but I think in both cases, there will be a way to open up these gates of commerce.
The Olympics used to be amateur, or at least said they were. This week, the EU Parliament voted to boycott the Beijing Winter Olympics over China's human rights policies. And do you think the US under the Biden administration might take a similar path?
I don't. I mean, I think there's still so much residue 40 plus years later from the Soviet boycott in 1980. I mean, you still have athletes today who are now in their 50s and 60s who are still so bitter about that. I think it's really hard today to do a blanket boycott, and probably Nike is probably a bigger player in the Olympics than the U.S. government and the USOC. I think it's really tricky, but I do think that these games are going to be very politicized. I think there are going to be some athletes who choose not to participate, and I think that those that do, and the companies that are sponsors of these games, starting with Nike, are going to face a lot of pressure. And I mean, it's interesting that we're having, there's a whole separate discussion about the Olympics and the Winter Olympics. And it's strange for a lot of people that a site that hosted the Summer Olympics are now hosting the Winter Olympics. I mean, the truth is the Winter Olympics are becoming a bit of a dinosaur, but I'm not sure we're going to see any type of government boycott. I mean, I think there'll be a lot of individual pressure. Again, the free market is a powerful force in sports, and I think you are going to see some tap dancing and maybe some individual athletes boycott, but I don't think the USOC is, especially this late in the game, is going to tell athletes they can't participate.
This next question is not for you, but it's for your mother, Judy Wertheim, who is on the call. What career path, Judy, did you think John might take when he was growing up?
Um, I think maybe you could have seen me when he was talking about his growing up in Bloomington, and I was nodding all of the time, because what I remember very clearly is that when Lewis was in high school and working for the whole press that he told you about, he said the thing in life that gave him the most pleasure was writing. So I always knew that he was going to try to find something that involved writing. And I always knew that because Lewis always figured out a way to do what he wanted to do, even when I said no. I didn't try to influence him, at least I don't think, when he was growing up. And what makes me as a mother really happy is that he's doing something that even today he likes more than anything else.
Thank you. John, back to you. What 60 Minutes episode did you find most challenging and difficult?
Oh, wow. You can feel free to pepper my mom with more questions. What? Well, I had one where I was supposed to do a piece in January on Angus King, the senator from Maine, and I had seen him around Christmas time, and we had a nice day in his home district, and then we were supposed to meet on January 6th in Washington, D.C. at his office. And I arrived in Washington, D.C. and then got to my hotel and turned on CNN, and it was not the circumstances I had envisioned. And he said, you know, I'm not going to let what happened today in my office disrupt my schedule. I'm keeping my date. Come by tomorrow morning. And 60 Minutes, and we've got an interview with a sitting senator, you know, the day after the January 6th, whatever we want, you know, the insurrection. And so they wanted the story for that Sunday. Usually stories can take weeks and weeks and weeks. This was, you know, a 48-hour turnaround, a fairly volatile situation, a completely different story than what I envisioned. And it was just sort of a you know, go for 48 hours. I'd never done, I'd certainly done, as Mr. Hamill can attest, deadlines are part of the lifeblood of real print journalism. I've certainly done tight deadlines writing, but I never had a tight TV deadline like that, especially for a story that came out of nowhere, and especially for a story that I envisioned as something very different than what it ended up being. So that was sort of a TV piece with a print with a print deadline, which was a different challenge than I was used to at 60 Minutes.
You always work with a producer for 60 Minutes. How hard is it for you to get up to speed on the stories? For instance, going into Hungary with a difficult language and a difficult political situation. How difficult is that for you?
I'm looking, you'll see me looking over my shoulder. I wish I had a binder. I mean, the short answer is it really depends on the story. And sometimes I come up with my own ideas. And you say, hey, we should do something on the Japanese baseball player who hits home runs and he pitches. Or I did a story a few months ago on Dave Kindred, who actually used to cover IU for the Courier Journal and now is in Peoria covering a high school team. And that was sort of my idea, and I conceived
high school girls team, which is
high school girls. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which it's a great story. It's a great you know, it's a good sort of parable for those of us in media, how to be enterprising and still keep doing what you like. You know, that story was my idea. I knew the guy. I mean, that was sort of an easy one. Other times, you get a research binder and you just sort of lock yourself in a room, and sometimes the stories come from producers who say, I have a great idea. And you say, that sounds cool, but I don't know the first thing about, I don't know, pick the self-driving trucks, or I don't know the first thing about Hungary. And it's lurching towards authoritarianism. And you get it. I'm seeing if I have one I can show you. I hope I'm not violating any company secrets, but the short answer is it really depends. I mean, some stories took very little research, honestly. You're familiar with the material, and others, you have to get up to speed in a hurry. And to me, it's one of the great appeals of the job. You just so someone calls you with an idea, and sometimes you don't know the first thing about the person they're talking about. You've never heard their music, you've never been to the country, you've never spoken the language, and you just try to cram as much information into your head as you can, so you at least give the appearance of having some idea you know what you're doing. And other stories are very comfortable and familiar, and to me that's a real appeal of the job.
It's clear that you love writing. Do you find it difficult to go back and forth between broadcast style on television and more magazine style in Sports Illustrated?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's kind of these are, I'm sure Dean Brown can jump in here. I mean, these are crazy times in media, and you know, the newspapers of today and the media world of today is not at all what it was certainly in the 80s when I was going into the HT. One of I feel like the deep dark secret is that it's kind of fun as a practitioner, that you don't have the job stability and you don't know where the train is going, and no one really does, but you get to bounce around and doing TV one day, in another day, just going to the coffee shop with your laptop. To me, it's made it a lot. I mean, I really like the variety. It's true though, that there's some stories that work great as a magazine story that they're not visual, they don't translate. There's some words. I mean, I wrote the word, I was talking about a cowboy, and I wrote the other day that he was the de facto music director of the ranch, and the producer sort of laughed and said we would never use the word de facto on TV. That's a print word. So, you know, it's macro, it's the same, like I said, I mean, sort of at the most macro level, it's the same job. You're telling stories and meeting people and trying to be informative, and maybe if you're lucky, a little entertaining at the same time. But there definitely are different skill sets. And to me, it's really been kind of, I don't want to say rejuvenating, but to me, like the fact that some things will work for print that won't work for TV and vice versa is really a benefit. I mean, to me, it's sort of keeps things fresh. And now it's at the point where I don't know. I mean, now it seems really limiting and restrictive to say I just do X or I just do Y. Again, I always tell the story when I started at Sports Illustrated, you would have to get written permission to do sort of a radio interview. If NPR wanted to ask you about Wimbledon, you'd have to get permission because you stayed in your lane and you were a writer. And if you wanted to do a radio hit for 3 minutes, that was seen as you were veering out of your lane, and you would need permission. Now it's a bit more of the Wild West, and that's, you know, media is in a strange place and no one knows where it's going. But one benefit I find is that it's really a lot of fun to be able to do these different platforms now in a way you couldn't when I started.
With such variety in your life as a journalist, do you have any passion projects ahead that you'd like to share?
I'm trying my hand at a screenplay. I'm taking a little. I always like to have a book project kind of brewing as sort of you do it on airplanes or when you have a down moment. I'm going to try and do. Someone was. I don't know if someone was interested in turning something I wrote into a screenplay. So I think that's what we're going to be working on next. Again, with Angelo Pizzo as my lodestar. I guess my new passion project is trying to turn this story into a film or a TV series.
A kind of fun question. Who is the most interesting sports broadcaster personality? And do you have any good stories about that person?
Oh man. Oh wow. That's a good one. And I'm at a bit of a loss. I mean, I'm a big fan of Bob Costas, who you will not see at the Olympics, and I think one reason is because his interests have veered a little bit, and I think he's at a point in his life where he can do passion projects. I wrote I ghost wrote a book with Al Michaels a few years ago, who was someone I watched all the time as a child, and I don't know if good story. I mean, he started out. It's interesting. He started out as a baseball reporter, as a baseball commentator, and was hired by the Cincinnati Reds. He'd been living in Hawaii covering the minor league team, and the Reds called, and he was sort of, you know, it's majors versus minors, but he had an apartment that overlooked a bay in Honolulu, and next thing he was moving to Cincinnati. And his big break was at the time when NBC covered the World Series. It was, I think it was Joe Garagiola, but for the other person in the booth, they would use the local TV personality. And so the Reds played in the World Series, and Al Michaels was 25 years old. And just by dint of the Reds being so good, he was the guy who got to work in NBC. So that was his big break with the Cincinnati Reds. And now, you know, in 2021, he's still doing his job on NBC on Sunday nights.
Moving to a more serious question. Would you comment, please, on the Trevor Bauer situation? Bauer has a big contract. He's been accused of sexual abuse. How are professional sports generally dealing with the issue of sexual misconduct?
You know, I think sports has come a long way in a fairly short amount of time. That's the good news. I mean, remember Ray Rice, which I think was 2012 or 2013. Within the last decade, you had this Ray Rice incident, and everyone sort of knew the story. It wasn't until the video surfaced that people were outraged. So he had already been disciplined, and it wasn't until, and I think the clumsiness with which the NFL handled that, and the fact that it was sort of a non-story until people saw the video for themselves, I think that was a bit of a reset. And the allegations in this case are just horrific. You have these different constituents. You know, you have a league, you have a team, you have a union, and interests aren't always aligned, and language in collective bargaining isn't always aligned. And it seems to me that a suspension pending an investigation probably ought to be the standard. And if you know, if they essentially said, listen, these allegations have come up, they're horrific. If they're true, this is criminal behavior. But while we investigate this, you're not going to the ballpark, you're not pitching, you're not doing media, stay home, we'll call you. That's the kind of thing that would be in a collective bargaining agreement. But I think that's probably better for all parties. I mean, I've read what you've read. I mean, I don't have any inside knowledge. I mean, the allegations are just horrific. And the fact that, you know, he was going to continue pitching in the face of these allegations was, I think, pretty horrific for a lot of people. I think that a domestic violence policy is something that usually is negotiated with a league and a union. But in cases like this, I just think it probably benefits everyone to just keep the person away from sports until we know more.
John, thank you so much for your participation today, for your willingness to field all of these interesting questions. Only one baseball question, what up? However, are you able to stay a few minutes after 1 o'clock in case anybody has more questions?
I would be happy to. We can even talk baseball. Big game tonight. No, I'd be happy to.
Thank you so much. In honor of your presentation today, we're going to make a donation to a local nonprofit organization here in Bloomington. We're going to draw from the hat next week to select our quarterly recipient. And in the meantime, I want to ask my fellow Rotarians if you would please suggest a new nonprofit or two that you would like to be put into the hat. Just send me an email at gaskill@indiana.edu with the name of the group, and I'll add it to the hat. And now over to Alam Barker, who's going to introduce next week's program.
Thank you very much, President Gaskill. That was a fantastic conversation and just extraordinary, really so inspiring. So next week, we will continue our voyage of discovery with somebody else who's absolutely wonderful. Our speaker is Lauren Schoenberg. I don't believe he's a relative of the famous composer Arnold Schoenberg, but so we'll make sure of that. He's the founding director of the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. faculty member at Juilliard, jazz historian, and has won 2 Grammys. So it should be a lot of fun next week, and looking forward to it.
Thank you. Natalie, could you please share the 4-way test graphic? And we will close the meeting by reciting the 4-way test +1. You may unmute. First,
of the things
we think, say, or do. First,
the truth.
Is it the truth?
The truth.
Second,
Is it
fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendship? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And fifth, is it fun? Ding! The recording can